Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Making of Outlander, the series, the official guide to Seasons 1 and 2, by Tara Bennett, narrated by Tiffany Morgan. Introduction. Diana Gabaldon. I get a lot of totally undeserved praise for the Outlander show. Granted, I did write the books, and I did give the world Jamie, Claire, and Blackjack Randall, and a few hundred-odd other people, but my only part in the evolution of this fantastic show was to be extremely lucky. "You were so smart to hold out for Ron," all the fans exclaim. "How did you approach him, or did he come looking for you?" To be perfectly honest, I'd never heard of Ronald D. Moore prior to the film rights being acquired by Sony and hadn't the slightest idea what a showrunner was or what one might do. So, what did happen? Well, you've probably heard of a film option. In essence, this means that a production company pays a writer a modest amount of money in return for a period of time. During this period, the producer has the exclusive right to kill themselves trying to put together the necessary financing, staffing, and logistical package needed to make whatever film adaptation they have in mind. If they succeed, they pay you a slightly larger sum, which is the purchase price of the film rights. Thereafter, they own it in perpetuity, throughout the universe, forever. You'll never get it back. This is a hard thing to do, though, and most options lapse without anything happening. But there's always an outside chance that one will come to fruition, and this is why you don't want to do option agreements with people unless you trust them to do a reasonable adaptation of your work. Frankly, most film people don't have the slightest intention of making a faithful adaptation of your work. Though some are more honest than others about saying so, it therefore behooves a writer and a writer's agents to be careful about whom you do options with. That being so, in spite of constant requests, we'd optioned the books only 4 times since Outlander was published in 1991. The first 3 options lapsed without result, as expected. The 4th was a guy named Jim Kohlberg. We liked Jim, and we still do. He'd made some very good small films, he genuinely loved the book, and he had a lot of persistence. I did tell him, as I've told people for the last 25 years, that I didn't think it was possible to make a 2-hour movie out of Outlander that had anything to do with the actual book, but he had my blessing to try. And try he nobly did, through several years, several option renewals, and several scripts done by really good scriptwriters. Let's just say that I was right about the 2-hour movie thing. Somewhere in this process, though, a lightning bolt hit the biological soup in some remote primordial swamp, and something new stirred in the depths. Ron Moore finished Battlestar Galactica and began looking for a new television project that he could be passionate about. Introduced to Outlander by his production partner, Merrill Davis, backed up by his wife, Terry Dressback, who'd also read and loved the books, Ron read it and got interested. He found out who had the option on the books and called Jim. Jim still wanted to make a 2-hour movie, and Ron, ever a patient man, bided his time. He or Merrill calling back every 6 months, until at last Jim conceded that it might be a TV show. And lo, Sony spake, the ground shook, and 2 years of intense negotiation ensued, ending up, finally, in a Baroque 5-sided agreement involving Sony, Ron, Jim Kohlberg, Starz, and me. I didn't know Ronald D. Moore from a hole in the ground at this point. In all fairness, he didn't know me from a hole in the ground either. but he wanted to make a 10-episode TV show out of Outlander, and that was obviously a more feasible prospect than a 2-hour movie, so I was all for it. Very slowly, things started to happen. Ron and Meryl, bless them, came out to my house and spent 2 days talking through characters, storylines, backstory, my thoughts on things, their thoughts on things, and we turned out to be very much on the same wavelength as to what constituted a good story. And then Starz took on the show and things started happening faster. Actors began to be cast, a studio was being built in Scotland, and suddenly it all started to be real. And the fans, who had been waiting impatiently for 25 years to see a screen version of the story they loved, went nuts. About 2 months after Sam Heughan was cast to play the part of Jamie Fraser, when the fans' demonstrations of enthusiasm and creativity online began to be truly visible, Sam emailed me and asked, "What will they do when they actually see the show?" To which I replied, either they'll collectively wet their pants, or they'll march down the street waving torches and demanding Ron's head on a pike. You know, if there's something you want urgently to do in life, do it. The universe will usually come out to meet you. In my case, I knew I was meant to write novels, and when I was 36, about the age Sam and Katrina Balfe are now, I took my courage in both hands and wrote a novel. And, among other things, the universe brought me a TV show. Along with it came the acquaintance, sometimes the friendship, of a lot of magic people. Not only Ron and Meryl and Terry, not only Sam and Kat and Tobias Menzies and Graham McTavish and Lottie Verbeek and Gary Lewis, but all of you who've loved the books for so long and have longed to see them brought to life. It's your love, all of you, the fans, the producers, the actors, the crew, that's made this happen. All I did was open the door. So now it's open, and the world can come in. And I can't say more than I did the night of the first premiere in San Diego. Ladies and gentlemen, you've done me proud. Nice to know that Ron's head is safe, too. Outlander, The Origins. Will we ever get to see Outlander adapted for the screen? Since the novel first came out in 1991, author Diana Gabaldon has fielded that question from enthusiastic readers almost daily. The story of Claire Beauchamp Randall and Jamie Fraser seemed an obvious choice for a cinematic retelling, but the project was not without its logistical challenges. With the novel weighing in at more than 600 pages, the core dilemma always centered on how much of the action-packed adventure would have to be cut just to fit the traditional cinematic window of 2 hours. With too much to lose to the proverbial cutting room floor, the world of Outlander remained strictly in the realm of print. It wasn't until around 2010 that a possible solution started to present itself: a television series. Meryl Davis, a development executive and co-executive producer for Ronald D. Moore's Tall Ship Productions, was looking for potential properties to produce and had the books recommended to her by friend and softball teammate Matthew B. Roberts. Roberts had read the books as a reader during one of his first jobs, Davis explains. He passed on the books because they wanted to do movies, but told me they would be great for TV. I took him up on that and read them all the way through. I loved them, Davis says with unabashed adoration. This, to me, was my passion project. But the television landscape at the time wasn't yet the haven for high-concept sci-fi series it seems to be today. Game of Thrones was not on at that point. Ron had tried to do Dragon Riders of Pern. It just didn't feel like the timing was right. Cut to a personal dinner Davis was having with Moore and his wife, Terry Dressback, where the three started talking about the projects they had always longed to do. I said, "My passion project is this book series called Outlander, and I would love to do them," Davis recalls. I didn't realize Terry was also a fan, so we talked, and Ron seemed intrigued. Terry and I talked about it after the dinner a few times, Moore remembers, but it wasn't really until I sat down and started reading the book that I saw the potential. From that first read, he says, he was struck by how Gabaldon's writing kept surprising him. By the time I got to the end of the book, there had been some significant twists and turns that I didn't see coming. In my head, I could definitely see a season of television and how it works through a season. Plus the fact that, at that point, there were multiple books in the series just meant that it had a life beyond season 1. I remember thinking, if the other books are anywhere near as good as this, then, essentially, I'm in. Davis was thrilled to get the go-ahead to pursue. I got in touch with the rights holder, Jim Kohlberg. We had a great meeting, but it was very obvious that they wanted to do this book series as films. Davis left the meeting convinced a film would not do justice to the books. Reluctantly, we walked away, she says. But I was like a dog with a bone, she continues, laughing. I just kept checking back every once in a while. One of the times, they were open to doing TV, so Ron and I went back in there and had a fabulous meeting, and it kind of started there. Davis says they pitched Chris Parnell, executive vice president of Sony Pictures Television, to be their studio partner, but he was unfamiliar with the books. To his credit, Chris went out and bought the book on tape and listened in his car, which was so cute, she says. He would call me every once in a while and be like, "I am sitting in my car blushing," which was hilarious. By the book's end, Davis says Parnell was on board and ready to champion the show to the networks. The next step for Moore and Davis was to officially visit Gabaldon at her Scottsdale, Arizona residence. Just from the fan perspective, not even a producer perspective, I felt it was so important to get her approval, Davis says. I wanted her approval, and just to make sure she was comfortable that this book was in the right hands. I wanted to assure her that we weren't trying to exploit it and we understood what it was. There was Ron's track record, certainly as an amazing writer, but also as someone who obviously writes very strong female characters, from Battlestar Galactica to Carnival. I also wanted her to know that I was going to protect the series as well, it being so close to my heart and near and dear to me. For Gabaldon, having the books in serious development after so many years of thinking it couldn't work was beyond surprising. People are always asking, why is it that you held out for Ron? The truth is that I didn't, she says with her trademark candor. We were very careful who we did options with because there was always a possibility that they would succeed, in which case you will never get the rights back. We had done this only 4 times, and, luckily, none of the first 3 times took. But it seemed an Outlander series was finally about to happen in earnest. Gabaldon recalls that she was very curious about the pair who made it happen. They came and spent 2 days with me at my house, talking over storylines, characters, and backstory, asking had I written anything that wasn't in the books that they should be aware of. Where did I see the story going? Ron was sharing with me his vision of storytelling and what he thought of the characters. I could tell that we were pretty much on the same wavelength with regard to the importance of a central character in a story, which predisposed me to him. Gabaldon was also impressed during those initial meetings by the clarity of the vision Moore had for the series. He began to share his own philosophy and his take on how things would work, she goes on. He said he would like to start the series, with a little visual prologue that takes place before Outlander, the book, actually starts. He'd show Claire during World War II in a military hospital out in France, saving people's lives. She is a central character, and we need to fix her in people's consciousness immediately as the main person of interest. And I am sort of nodding as he is saying all this and going, yes, you are right. I could tell he did know what he was doing, and I approved the direction he saw for doing it. I gave them my blessing to start the script the way Ron wanted to, Gabaldon explains. A few days later, Moore sent over his pilot script. I told him when I read it, this is the only thing that I have ever read based on my own work that didn't make me turn white or burst into flames, so I was favorably impressed. Moore says gaining Diana's favor gave them reassurance that they were taking the right direction with her work, which he felt was important given how devoted the series' readers have proven themselves to be over the years. We really wanted to engage and keep the fan base that was already there from the books and transfer them over to the TV show, Moore explains. Diana had her finger on that pulse for many, many years. She knew them pretty intimately, communicated with them, and had a good sense of what was important to them. She was a good indicator of where we were. She kept us in the lane. For Davis, Gabaldon's approval gave the series the ability to credibly move forward. I don't know if we could have gone ahead, in my mind, without her approval in some way. We didn't technically need it because, obviously, at that point we had secured the rights. But I think for me, having her approval and having her on board with what we were doing was incredibly important, and I don't think we could have done it without her. Finding the right home for the show was the next step, which required the ever-growing Team Outlander, at this point comprised of Davis, Moore, and Parnell, as well as Sony executives Jamie Ehrlicht and Zach Van Amberg, to once again pitch the idea. But Davis says Starz was impressed from the very first meeting. We would walk into every pitch meeting, me, Ron, the Sony executives, with this huge stack of Diana's books to show them how much material there was. Starz was the only place we went that they had actually read the first book and were the only ones that also said to us, "We want you to stick to the books." Following that meeting, Outlander the television series was officially greenlit in November 2012 for development and a pilot. Almost 2 years later, after hiring a writer's room in Pasadena, California, setting up a transatlantic production in Scotland, and casting the characters readers had been picturing in their mind's eyes for over 2 decades, Moore was able to share with Gabaldon the first footage of her world brought to life. Gabaldon remembers that it was behind the scenes at an Outlander fan event in January 2014 when Moore asked if she'd like to take a look. I said, "Yeah, I would." He had it on his laptop, and we were all sitting back there on this ratty old sofa. He opened his laptop, and that is where I saw the first few scenes of Outlander. I was totally fascinated. It was beautiful, and it was terrific. Just shy of 23 years from when Gabaldon first put to paper her story about a woman traveling back in time through standing stones, that story was taking on a new form, as actors breathed life into the beloved characters and the vast beauty of Scotland served as its backdrop. Outlander, the series, takes the story of Claire Beauchamp Randall and James Mackenzie Fraser into a whole new realm, and in this book, that journey is our story. In the writer's room. The writer's room is the creative spine of any scripted television series. From it, all things are made. So when Ron Moore and Meryl Davis set their sights on hiring the people who would write and produce each episode, they put a lot of thought into the creative balance of the series. While Ron Moore is a veteran showrunner, Battlestar Galactica, Outlander was his first experience in adapting a TV series from a book, to say nothing of the pressure of pleasing the enthusiastic and exacting fandom that would be coming to the series from Gabaldon's books. Fortunately, his co-executive producer, Meryl Davis, was a fan herself and relished the task of creating a series that readers would embrace. It was really important to do the fan/non-fans split in the room, because basically that's what you argue about when you are breaking the stories. Moore says, you want to have the argument front and center about what is critical to the book and what can be changed without changing it too far. It was really important that we had both perspectives in the room so that we could get a coherent line of thought as we were structuring everything. Beyond that, I thought conceptually that I wanted a room that was half men and half women. Moore adds, I thought that would be an important part of the mix as it's a female narrative story written by a woman. Then it was just about figuring out who the players were. Moore and Davis first looked to collaborators they had worked with before, including Matthew B. Roberts, who introduced Davis to the book years before. Matt had come out of the Caprica writer's room, Moore explains. He and I had developed and written a couple pilots together, so even though we had never formally been on the same staff before, I had a good sense of Matt and what his skill set was. He was a no-brainer, along with the fact that he is a male book fan, which was really important to us, Davis adds. As it turns out, Roberts also assumed the mantle of second unit director, responsible for the episodic title card segments and any needed pickup shots throughout the production year. Tony Graffia was somebody I had worked with on several shows like Roswell, Carnival, and Battlestar Galactica, Moore says. I really like her, and thought this would be something she would cotton to. With Ira Bear, I had worked with him at Star Trek for many years, but then we had not worked on a project since that point, Moore explains. He adds a completely different sensibility, which is great because he is not your typical fan, Davis says. Last, but not least, was Anne Kenny. She and I had never worked together directly, but Matt Roberts and I had gone out to pitch a series that the two of them had come up with, and they brought me into the development process, Moore says. I thought she was smart, a good writer, and Outlander was a good fit for her. Moore's last requirement was that each of them needed to be writer-producers, working in Scotland to help produce episodes on location. They definitely had to have that as part of their skill set, and each of them did, he adds. Each of them had been in the business long enough and had enough familiarity with production that I felt confident that we could make this work. When the Scotland production team was in place, producer David Brown suggested a block shooting schedule, which would create a more efficient system for the aggressive filming needs of the series. Such a schedule, in which 2 episodes are shot together over 5 weeks, enables pre-production to have enough time to prepare for the 2-episode block that follows. I would be lying if I didn't say this was by far the hardest show we have ever worked on, Davis says. So you need some sort of consistency. The block system fulfills that need by assuring that each block is supported by at least one writer-producer who is there for the entire 5 weeks. Because it is such a serialized show and such a complicated backstory, the writers are really the keepers of the flame in some ways, she adds. We feel it's necessary that the director works with the writer-producer all the way through prep and production. While filming is underway, Moore and Davis fly back and forth between the Outlander writer's room in Los Angeles and the Scottish production studio, sometimes multiple times a month. As season 2 progressed, Moore decided to spend more time in post-production, finishing episodes on time and to his satisfaction. I am one of the few executive producers that follow the episode production from nose to tail, from the initial story and story breaks all the way to final delivery. Once Moore saw what his staff was accomplishing in the field, relinquishing some time in Scotland made sense. You have to trust and empower the people who work for you to carry out those plans and to trust their creative takes on individual pieces, Moore says. Sometimes that writer knows what has to happen in that script better than I do, because they have lived with it. The journey from book to screen. Casting. For 2 decades, Diana Gabaldon's Outlander novels existed exclusively on the page and in readers' heads. Fans had free license to imagine their own Claires, Jamies, Murtaughs et al., mentally casting and recasting based on Diana's descriptions, celebrity crushes, or doppelganger acquaintances until the cows came home. As with any beloved book or series, everyone has their own mental picture of what those characters look like. And suddenly, the show's producers and the series casting team had to find real-life actors to be the public, official face of those characters, shouldering a Mount Everest-size burden of fan expectation. As one of those longtime readers and fans, executive producer Meryl Davis felt the responsibility keenly as they embarked on the casting process with Emmy-winning casting director Suzanne Smith, Band of Brothers. I love casting, but normally when we go into a project, I pretty quickly have a prototype in my head of who some of these characters are, Davis details. This is the first time I think I have approached a series where I literally had no idea in my head, because Jamie and Claire had been in my head for so long. That was a little daunting when we started the process. From her London-based casting office, Smith admits she had not been familiar with the books before she began work on the show, which enabled her to approach the process with a clean mental slate. She was, however, very aware of how invested the fandom was in who these characters were and who should play them. I know the fans have an idea that it has to be a certain set of eyes, she says, explaining that fans often focus on the physical descriptions provided in the books. But it is the acting that comes into it and what each of those actors brings to the table. Smith adds that often means that a high-profile actor who might seem like a dream casting might not be right for the role, or available, or even interested in a television series. Sometimes names are mentioned, she says of early casting talks. Other times I mention names and then bring them in, or sometimes we get show reels for more prominent actors. The lovely thing about Starz and Sony was I was given the opportunity to cast unknowns, which is wonderful because casting is a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes names take away from a character. As it turns out, primary casting did lean toward unknowns and character actors, in part because Smith made it a priority to bring a sense of authenticity to the casting. We have utilized a lot of Scottish actors, she says. There are some actors who are not Scottish pretending to be Scottish, but a Scottish friend of mine said their accents are great. I have a casting associate who is with a casting director up in Scotland, so we work together in tandem to create everything, and we discuss it with our writer-producers. When it came to casting the core 3 characters, Jamie, Claire, and Blackjack/Frank, Davis and Smith said they were prepared to cast wide nets and potentially commit to a long search. Jamie, in particular, was assumed by all to be the casting unicorn of the bunch. I said to Ron that there's no way we're going to find Jamie, Davis laughs. We called Jamie the king of men in the writer's room, So it's strange that we found him so quickly. When they released the casting call for Jamie, a process that Davis explains involves her and the writers collaborating on a character description and sending it out into the world, piles of taped auditions came back from...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?